How does pushing my husband's children into boarding school end with legal papers in my hand and my family's eyes burning with blame? What started as my way of reclaiming peace at home turned into a public reckoning, delivered in a lawyer's office, with everyone watching. Can I really call him the villain when the judge calls my name? The silence in our suburban house should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm I was determined to create. I stood in the kitchen, watching Thomas help 10-year-old Mila with her homework at the dining table, while 13-year-old Sam sulked in the corner, earbuds in, deliberately ignoring my presence. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for when I married Thomas 2 years ago. "Edra, could you help Mila with her math?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying that hopeful tone he always used when trying to bridge the gap between his children and me. "I'm busy," I replied curtly, not looking up from my phone where I was scrolling through boarding school websites. The Riverside Academy looked promising, far enough away that weekend visits would be inconvenient. Thomas sighed, the sound grating against my nerves. At 42, he was still attractive in that rumpled teacher way, but lately, all I could see was weakness. The way he let his children dictate our household schedule, the way he prioritized their needs over mine, over our marriage. "Sam, dinner's in 10 minutes, I announced loudly, knowing he couldn't hear me through his music. When he didn't respond, I walked over and yanked one earbud out. "What's your problem?" Sam snapped, his brown eyes, so much like his father's, flashing with adolescent anger. "My problem is that you're being disrespectful. When I speak, you listen." "You're not my mum," Sam shot back, the words hitting their intended target perfectly. "Sam!" Thomas's voice carried a warning, but it was too little, too late. The damage was done, and honestly, I was glad for it. This kind of behavior was exactly what I needed to document. "It's fine, Thomas," I said, my voice taking on that martyred tone I'd perfected over the past year. "I'm used to being treated like an outsider in my own home." Mila looked up from her math worksheet, her small face creased with confusion and worry. "Daddy, why is everyone always mad?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Thomas reached over to smooth his daughter's blonde hair that reminded me too much of his deceased first wife, whose photos still decorated the hallway despite my subtle suggestions to remove them. "Nobody's mad, sweetheart," Thomas lied smoothly. "We're just having a discussion." But I could see the exhaustion in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly as he helped Mila with her fractions. Good. He was wearing down, just like I needed him to. That evening, after the children were finally in bed, I cornered Thomas in our bedroom. He was grading papers, at the small desk by the window, red pen moving mechanically across student essays about their summer vacations. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me with deliberate finality. Thomas didn't look up immediately, finishing whatever comment he was writing, before setting down his pen and turning to face me. "What's on your mind?" "The children," I said, settling onto the edge of our bed. "This isn't working, Thomas. The constant tension, the disrespect, the way they undermine our marriage at every turn." "They're just adjusting." "It's been 2 years," I interrupted. "How much more adjusting do they need? How much more am I supposed to sacrifice for children who clearly don't want me here?" Thomas rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd seen more and more frequently. "What are you suggesting?" "Boarding school." The words came out crisp and clean, like I'd been practicing them, which I had. "I've been researching options. There are some excellent institutions that could give Sam and Mila the structure they need, the attention they're not getting here." "Absolutely not." Thomas's response was immediate and firm. "I'm not sending my children away." "Our children," I corrected, though the words tasted bitter. "And you're not thinking clearly. Look at Sam. He's failing 2 classes, he's disrespectful, he's clearly acting out because he needs more discipline than we can provide here. And Mila clings to you constantly. She needs to learn independence. They lost their mother 3 years ago, Edra. They need stability, not another abandonment. I felt my jaw clench at his words. Always back to the sainted first wife, always back to their tragic loss. I'm not asking you to abandon them. I'm asking you to consider what's best for everyone involved, including our marriage. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, the guilt and exhaustion warring with his protective instincts. I won't even consider it unless there's a real crisis, he said finally. I smiled, though he wasn't looking at me to see it. A crisis could be arranged. The next morning, I made sure to be in the kitchen when Sam came down for breakfast. He grabbed a granola bar and headed for the door, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Sit down and eat a proper breakfast," I called after him. "I'm going to be late," he mumbled, not stopping. I said, "Sit down." My voice carried the authority I'd learned to project at work, the tone that made my subordinates snap to attention. Sam stopped, his shoulders tensing. "I don't have time." "You have time for what I tell you to have time for. In this house, we eat breakfast together as a family." "Since when?" Sam turned around, his young face twisted with confusion and anger. "We never eat breakfast together. You're usually already gone to work." He was right, of course, but that wasn't the point. "Don't talk back to me. Sit down, eat breakfast, and then we'll discuss your attitude problem." "I don't have an attitude problem." The yelling suggests otherwise. Thomas appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. He looked between Sam and me, clearly trying to assess the situation. "What's going on?" "Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories." "Your son is being disrespectful again," I said, crossing my arms. "I asked him to sit down for breakfast, and he's arguing with me." "I'm going to be late for school." Sam's voice cracked with frustration. "Sam, just grab your granola bar and go," Thomas said quietly. "We'll talk about breakfast routines later." The betrayal I felt was sharp and immediate. "Excuse me, I'm trying to establish some order in this house, and you're undermining me in front of him. I'm trying to get him to school on time. And I'm trying to teach him respect." Sam used our argument as cover to slip out the front door, the sound of it slamming, punctuating our disagreement perfectly. Thomas and I stared at each other across the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows highlighting every line of exhaustion on his face. "This has to stop, Edra." "You're right," I agreed. "It does." But I could tell we weren't talking about the same thing. That afternoon, I called Riverside Academy and scheduled a tour for the following weekend. Then I called my sister Nora. "You're doing the right thing," Nora assured me, her voice warm with support through the phone. "You can't be expected to sacrifice your happiness for children who don't appreciate you." "Thomas thinks I'm being too harsh." "Thomas is a pushover. Those kids need structure, and if he can't provide it, then you need to find someone who can. You deserve peace in your own home, Edra." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the office parking lot for a few extra minutes, letting Nora's words settle over me like a comfortable blanket. She was right. I did deserve peace. I deserved a marriage where I came first, where every conversation wasn't about homework and soccer practice and grief counseling. When I finally walked into the office, Lucas was waiting by my desk with coffee and that smile that had been making my pulse quicken for the past month. "Rough morning?" he asked, noting my expression. "The usual family drama," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Sometimes I wonder why I thought marrying a widower with kids was a good idea. Lucas's expression grew sympathetic. At 37, he was successful, unencumbered, and refreshingly focused on adult concerns. "Want to talk about it over lunch?" I glanced around the open-plan office, noting the curious glances from co-workers. Let them look. Let them see that someone valued my company, my conversation, my needs. "I'd like that," I said and meant it. The restaurant Lucas chose for lunch was upscale, intimate, the kind of place Thomas never thought to take me. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, and for the first time in months, I felt like the center of someone's attention. So tell me about this family drama, Lucas said, cutting into his salmon with practiced ease. I found myself spilling everything: Sam's attitude, Mila's clinginess, Thomas's constant prioritizing of his children over our marriage. Lucas listened with the kind of focused attention I'd forgotten existed. It sounds like you're carrying a lot, he said when I finished. Taking care of everyone else's needs while your own get pushed aside. Exactly. The validation felt like cool water after a long drought. Thomas acts like I'm being unreasonable for wanting some peace in my own home. Like wanting to come first in my husband's life makes me selfish. You're not selfish for having needs, Edra. You're human. Our hands were resting on the table, and somehow his fingers had found mine. The touch was electric, forbidden, exactly what I needed. I've been thinking about boarding school for them, I admitted, just temporarily, until they adjust better to our family dynamic. That might be wise, Lucas agreed. Sometimes distance provides perspective, for everyone involved. When we returned to the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Several co-workers commented on my improved mood, and I found myself sharing edited versions of my lunch conversation. You're glowing, my colleague Janet observed. Good lunch? Very good, I replied, not bothering to hide my smile. That evening, Thomas was helping Mila with a school project when I arrived home. They had art supplies spread across the dining room table, and Mila was chattering excitedly about her presentation on butterflies. How was work? Thomas asked without looking up from the poster board they were decorating. Fine, I said curtly, annoyed by his divided attention. We need to talk about this weekend. What about this weekend? I scheduled a tour of Riverside Academy, Saturday morning at 10. Thomas's hand stilled on the poster board. Mila looked between us with those wide, worried eyes that always made me feel like the villain. You scheduled what? A tour. I told you I was researching options. I told you I wouldn't consider boarding school unless there was a crisis. There is a crisis, I said, my voice rising slightly. The crisis is our marriage falling apart because you refuse to prioritize it. Daddy? Mila's small voice cut through our tension. What's boarding school? Thomas shot me a look that could have frozen fire. It's nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Why don't you go wash up for dinner? After Mila reluctantly left the room, Thomas turned to face me fully. We are not having this conversation in front of the children. Then when are we having it? You're always with them, always focused on them. When exactly am I supposed to get your attention? You have my attention now. Only because I forced the issue. I could hear my voice getting shrill, but I couldn't stop myself. Do you know how that feels, Thomas? To have to compete with children for my own husband's time and consideration. They're not just children, they're my children, and they need me. I need you too, or have you forgotten that you have a wife? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something. Finally, he sighed. Fine, we'll go look at the school, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. It wasn't the enthusiastic agreement I'd hoped for, but it was progress. Thank you, I said, softening my tone. I know this isn't easy, but I really think it could help everyone. The next few days passed in relative peace, but I could sense Thomas's reluctance like a weight in the air. He was quieter than usual, spending even more time with Sam and Mila, as if he could somehow make up for considering sending them away. Meanwhile, my lunch meetings with Lucas became a daily occurrence. We talked about everything: work, life, dreams, frustrations. He was everything Thomas wasn't. Attentive, supportive, completely focused on me when we were together. You seem happier lately, he observed on Thursday, reaching across the table to touch my hand again. Despite everything at home. I am happier, I admitted. These lunches, talking to you, it reminds me who I am outside of being a stepmother and feeling like I'm failing at it. You're not failing at anything, Edra. You're just in an impossible situation. His thumb traced across my knuckles, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. Sometimes, I wonder what my life would be like if I'd made different choices. It's not too late to make new ones. That evening, I found Thomas in his study, grading papers with the kind of methodical focus that usually irritated me. Tonight, though, I felt generous, buoyed by Lucas's attention and the promise of Saturday's school tour. "How was your day?" I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Thomas looked up, surprised by my conversational tone. "Good. Busy. The freshman English classes are struggling with essay structure, but that's normal for this time of year. And the kids? Sam had soccer practice. Mila's working on her butterfly project." He paused, studying my face. "How was your day?" "Fine. Productive." I decided to test the waters. I've been thinking about what happens after we tour the school on Saturday. "Edra, just hear me out. If we do decide to enroll them, it doesn't have to be permanent. Just for a semester, maybe 2. Give them some structure, give us some space to reconnect as a couple." Thomas set down his red pen and rubbed his temples. "They've been through so much already. Their mother's death, adjusting to you, adjusting to our marriage. I don't want them to feel like I'm abandoning them too." "You wouldn't be abandoning them. You'd be giving them opportunities we can't provide here. Small class sizes, dedicated tutors, extracurricular activities. They have extracurricular activities here." "Thomas," I leaned forward, making my voice as gentle as possible. "I know you love them. I know you want what's best for them. But sometimes what's best isn't what's easiest or most comfortable." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the stack of ungraded papers. "I just want everyone to be happy." "I know, but you can't make everyone happy by sacrificing your own happiness. Or our marriage." Friday morning brought an unexpected text from Thomas while I was having coffee with Lucas before work. "Family dinner tonight. Need to discuss tomorrow's school visit with kids. Please be home by 6. I showed Lucas the message, rolling my eyes. He wants to make it into this big family discussion, like they get a vote in what's best for them. "That's going to be a difficult conversation," Lucas observed. "It doesn't have to be if Thomas supports the decision instead of undermining it. And if he doesn't support it?" I looked at Lucas across the small cafe table, at his concerned expression and the way the morning light caught in his dark hair. "Then I'll have to decide what's more important, his children's comfort or our future together." Lucas reached across to squeeze my hand. "Whatever you decide, you know I support you." The warmth of his touch, the certainty in his voice, gave me the strength I needed for whatever was coming that evening. I deleted Thomas's text without responding and ordered another coffee. Let him wonder where I was. Let him worry about whether I'd show up for his family meeting. Maybe it was time he understood that I had options too. The family restaurant Thomas chose was one of those chain establishments with bright lighting and children's menus, clearly selected with Sam and Mila in mind, rather than creating an atmosphere conducive to serious adult conversation. I arrived 10 minutes late, having spent extra time on my makeup and hair. If this was going to be a performance, I intended to look the part. Thomas had secured a corner booth, and I could see the tension in his shoulders as I approached. Sam was slouched against the wall, earbuds in despite being at dinner, while Mila coloured on the paper placemat with the crayons the hostess had provided. Across from them sat Thomas's mother, Gwen, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her expression decidedly cool as she watched me approach. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding in next to Thomas. "Work ran over." "It's fine," Thomas replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I already ordered drinks for everyone." Gwen's sharp blue eyes fixed on me with the kind of assessment I'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. At 65, Thomas's mother still carried herself with the authority of the high school principal she'd been before retirement, and she'd never quite warmed to me the way she had to Thomas's first wife. "Edra," she said with a polite nod, "Thomas tells me you have some concerns about the children's schooling." Straight to business, then. I appreciated that, even if I didn't appreciate her presence at what should have been a family discussion. I think they might benefit from a more structured environment, I said carefully. Somewhere with smaller class sizes, more individual attention. Their grades are fine, Sam interjected, pulling out one earbud. I'm not failing anything anymore. It's not just about grades, I replied, keeping my voice level. It's about overall development, maturity, learning independence. What's wrong with our independence? Mila asked, looking up from her coloring with those wide eyes that always made me feel like I was kicking a puppy. Thomas cleared his throat. What Edra means is that boarding schools offer opportunities we might not be able to provide at home. Like what? Gwen's question carried a sharp edge. I felt my patience beginning to fray. This wasn't how I'd envisioned the conversation going. I'd expected Thomas to present a united front, to help sell the benefits, rather than leaving me to defend the decision alone. Like structured study time, organized activities, peer mentorship programs, I said, pulling out my phone to show them the Riverside Academy website I'd bookmarked. Look at their facilities, their success rates. Students who graduate from Riverside get into top colleges. Sam's in 8th grade, Gwen observed dryly. College is still several years away. Which is exactly why now is the perfect time to start building the foundation for his future success. I don't want to go to boarding school, Mila said quietly, her crayon stilling on the paper. I want to stay home with Daddy. The simple statement hung in the air like an accusation. I could feel the other diners' eyes on us, could sense that our family drama was becoming entertainment for strangers. Sometimes what we want and what's best for us are different things, I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. When I was your age, I didn't want to take piano lessons, but my parents made me, and I'm grateful for it now. This isn't piano lessons, Sam said, his voice carrying more venom than I'd expected from a 13-year-old. This is you trying to get rid of us. The accusation hit like a slap, and I felt my carefully maintained composure crack. That's not true, and it's incredibly unfair of you to say that. Is it? Sam's brown eyes, so much like his father's but harder, fixed on mine. You've been trying to change everything about our family since you married Dad. First it was redecorating Mum's house, then it was getting rid of Mum's pictures. Now you want to get rid of us too. Sam. Thomas's voice carried a warning, but the damage was done. I have never tried to get rid of your mother's pictures, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. I've been nothing but respectful of her memory. Respectful? Sam's laugh was bitter and far too mature for his age. You had Dad take down half of them and put the rest in our bedrooms so you wouldn't have to see them. That's enough, Thomas said firmly, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression as he looked at me. Is that true, Edra? Gwen's voice was dangerously quiet. I felt trapped, surrounded by hostile faces in a brightly lit restaurant where other families were enjoying peaceful dinners. I simply suggested that having pictures of his deceased wife in our bedroom might not be appropriate for our marriage. I don't think that's unreasonable. You made him take down the picture in the living room too, Mila said, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. The one where Mommy was holding me as a baby. I was trying to help us all move forward, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my own voice and hating it. I was trying to build a new family. By erasing the old one, Gwen said, and her words cut deeper than Sam's anger or Mila's tears. Thomas was staring at his hands, his shoulders curved inward as if he was trying to disappear. This wasn't going at all the way I'd planned. I'd expected resistance, but I'd also expected him to support me, to help them understand that this decision was about what was best for everyone. Look, I said, trying to regain control of the conversation. I know this is difficult, change always is, but Thomas and I are struggling as a couple, and part of that struggle comes from the fact that we never have time to focus on our relationship. We're always dealing with homework drama or behavioral issues or... Behavioral issues? Sam's voice cracked with indignation. What behavioral issues? The constant attitude, the disrespect, the way you undermine my authority in our home. It's not your home. The words exploded out of Sam with such force that several nearby tables turned to stare. It's our home. It was our home before you came, and you're trying to kick us out of it. Nobody's kicking anyone out, Thomas said quietly, finally finding his voice. We're just exploring options. No, Dad, she's exploring options. You're just going along with it like you always do. The truth of that statement was like a physical blow. I could see it in Thomas's face, the recognition that his son was right, that he had been passively allowing me to drive decisions about his children's lives. I think we should go, Thomas said, signaling for the check. We haven't even ordered food yet, I protested. I think we've said enough for one evening. Gwen was already helping Mila out of the booth, the little girl's colouring forgotten as she clung to her grandmother's hand. Come on, sweetheart, let's get you home. I'm riding with Grandma, Sam announced, not looking at either Thomas or me. Sam, Thomas started. I don't want to be in the car with her, Sam said, and the quiet venom in his voice was somehow worse than his earlier shouting. As we walked to our separate cars in the parking lot, I could feel the stares of other restaurant patrons following us through the windows. My cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be the reasonable adult, presenting logical arguments for a decision that would benefit everyone. Instead, I'd been painted as the evil stepmother trying to exile innocent children. The drive home was silent except for the sound of Thomas's turn signals and the hum of the heater. I stared out the passenger window, replaying the dinner conversation and growing angrier with each mile. That was a disaster, I said finally as we pulled into our driveway. What did you expect, Edra? You basically ambushed them. I ambushed them. You're the one who insisted on turning this into a family discussion instead of just making a parental decision. They're my children. They deserve to have a voice in decisions that affect their lives. They're children, Thomas. They don't get to vote on what's best for them any more than they get to vote on bedtimes or vegetables for dinner. We sat in the darkened garage, the engine ticking as it cooled, neither of us making a move to go inside. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake, Thomas said quietly. The boarding school or our marriage. The question hung between us like a challenge. Thomas turned to look at me, his face barely visible in the dim light from the garage door opener. I don't know anymore. His honesty was more devastating than anger would have been. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, a determination that surprised me with its intensity. Fine, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt, but I'm still going to tour the school tomorrow, with or without you. Edra. No, Thomas. I've tried to include you in this decision. I've tried to get your support. I've tried to make this work for everyone. But I'm done trying to convince you to prioritize our marriage. I'm done being the villain for wanting a peaceful home and a husband who puts me first sometimes. I got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving Thomas sitting alone in the garage. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled out my laptop. The Riverside Academy enrollment forms were still bookmarked in my browser. If Thomas wouldn't be a partner in this decision, then I'd make it myself. Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of weather that seemed designed to match the mood in our house. Thomas had barely spoken to me since our disastrous dinner, and the children had been avoiding me entirely, spending the night at Gwen's and returning only an hour before we were scheduled to leave for the school tour. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, professional but approachable, the kind of ensemble that suggested a concerned parent making difficult but necessary decisions. Thomas wore jeans and an old sweater, as if he was deliberately trying to look like he didn't belong at an elite boarding school. Do we really have to go? Mila asked from the back seat, her voice small and uncertain. We're just looking, Thomas replied, but I could hear the resignation in his voice. Sam stared out the window, earbuds in, his whole body language screaming his displeasure with the situation. I'd given up trying to engage with him directly. Every interaction ended in conflict, and today I needed to project calm competence. Riverside Academy was everything their website had promised: manicured grounds, impressive brick buildings, students walking between classes with the kind of purposeful energy that spoke to high expectations and achievement. The admissions director, Mrs. Patterson, met us in the main office with the kind of professional warmth that made even reluctant parents feel welcome. "Mr. and Mrs. Vey, and you must be Sam and Mila," she said, shaking hands with each of us in turn. "I'm so pleased you're considering Riverside for your family." The tour was comprehensive: dormitories with comfortable common areas, classrooms equipped with the latest technology, athletic facilities that rivaled small colleges. Mrs. Patterson spoke knowledgeably about their academic programs, their college placement rates, their approach to character development. "We find that students who come to us during middle school years adapt most easily to our community," she explained as we walked through the library. "They form lasting friendships and really benefit from our structured approach to study and personal growth." I could see Sam taking in the surroundings despite his determined sullenness, and even Mila seemed impressed by the art studio with its large windows and professional quality supplies. "What about weekends?" Thomas asked. "How often can parents visit?" "We encourage families to give students space to develop independence, especially during the first semester," Mrs. Patterson replied diplomatically. "Most families find that monthly visits work well, with more frequent contact during holiday breaks." Monthly visits. I tried to hide my satisfaction at the answer. That would give Thomas and me the space we needed to rebuild our relationship without constant interruptions. "Can we go home now?" Mila whispered to Thomas as we concluded the tour in Mrs. Patterson's office. "In just a few minutes, sweetheart," Thomas replied, but his attention was focused on the enrollment packet Mrs. Patterson was explaining. "Our application deadline for spring semester is next Friday," she said. "Given Sam and Mila's academic records, I don't foresee any problems with acceptance, but we do require both parents' signatures on the enrollment forms." Both parents' signatures. I glanced at Thomas, trying to read his expression. He was studying the forms with the same careful attention he gave to lesson plans, but I couldn't tell if he was seriously considering enrollment or just being polite. "We'll need some time to discuss this as a family," Thomas said finally. "Of course, please don't hesitate to call if you have any questions." The drive home was even more tense than the drive to the school. Sam had removed his earbuds and was staring at both Thomas and me with undisguised hostility. "So when do you ship us off?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Nobody's shipping anyone anywhere," Thomas replied. "We're just exploring options." "Right, options that involve getting rid of us, so you two can play house without any interruptions." "That's not what this is about," I said, turning to face him from the front seat. "Then what is it about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been trying to erase us from Dad's life since the day you married him." "Sam, that's enough," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it, Dad? Because I don't think it is. I think someone needs to say what we're all thinking, that she never wanted us, and now she's found a way to get rid of us that makes her look like the good guy." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt my carefully maintained composure crack completely. "You want to know what I think?" I said, my voice rising. "I think you're a spoiled, disrespectful child who's been allowed to run wild because your father feels guilty about your mother's death. I think you've been using that guilt to manipulate him and avoid any real consequences for your behavior." "Edra!" Thomas's voice was sharp with warning. "No, Thomas, I'm done walking on eggshells around his feelings. He wants to act like an adult. Let's treat him like one." "Sam, you've made it clear from day one that you don't want me in your family. Fine, but you don't get to make your father's life miserable because you can't accept that he's moved on." "My father hasn't moved on." Sam's voice cracked with emotion. "He married you because he was lonely and you were convenient, but he doesn't love you the way he loved my mom." The words hit like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because they might be true. I could see Thomas's face in the rearview mirror, could see him flinch at his son's brutal honesty. "That's enough from both of you," Thomas said quietly, but the damage was done. We spent the rest of the drive in toxic silence. When we pulled into the driveway, Sam bolted from the car without a word, slamming the front door behind him. Mila followed more slowly, tears streaming down her face. Thomas and I sat in the car for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a heavy blanket. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally. "Do what?" "Live like this, fight like this, pretend like we're a happy family when we're all miserable." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "What are you saying?" I pulled the enrollment forms from my purse, the ones I'd taken from Mrs. Patterson's office, while Thomas was distracted by Mila's questions about the art program. "I'm saying that something has to change. Either we make the hard decisions necessary to save our marriage, or we admit that this isn't working and stop torturing each other." Thomas stared at the forms in my hands. "Edra, we can't make this decision in anger." "I'm not angry, Thomas. I'm exhausted. I'm tired of being the villain in my own life. I'm tired of competing with ghosts and children for my husband's attention. I'm tired of living in a house where I'm treated like an intruder." "They don't treat you like an intruder, don't they?" I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "When's the last time Sam spoke to me with respect? When's the last time Mila came to me for help or comfort? When's the last time you chose me over them, even once?" Thomas had no answer for that, because we both knew the truth. In the hierarchy of his affections, I would always come last. "I'm going to fill out these forms," I said, opening the car door. "If you want to sign them, fine. If not, then we'll have a different conversation about our future." That evening, while Thomas helped the children with homework in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table and carefully filled out every line of the enrollment forms: name, address, emergency contacts, medical history, academic records. With each completed section, I felt a sense of relief, as if I was finally taking action instead of just enduring. When I finished, I walked into the living room where Thomas was helping Mila with a book report, while Sam worked on algebra at the coffee table. "I need your signature," I said, holding out the forms. Thomas looked up from Mila's notebook, his expression unreadable. "Now?" "Now." The children both stopped what they were doing, sensing the gravity of the moment. Mila's eyes filled with tears before Thomas had even taken the forms from my hands. "Daddy, please don't send us away," she whispered. Thomas stared at the signature line, pen hovering over the paper. I could see the war playing out in his expression. Love for his children versus exhaustion with our situation, guilt over his first wife's death versus obligation to our marriage. "Thomas," I said quietly, "this is our chance to fix things, to give everyone space to heal and grow. By separating our family, by giving our family a chance to become functional." Sam was watching his father with the kind of desperate attention usually reserved for life or death situations. Mila had stopped crying and was holding her breath, waiting for the decision that would change all their lives. Thomas signed the forms. The sound of his pen on paper seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Mila's breath came out in a sob, and Sam stared at his father with a look of betrayal so profound it was painful to witness. "I hate you," Sam said quietly, the words directed at both of us. "I hate you both." He walked upstairs without another word. Mila ran to Thomas, throwing her arms around his neck and crying as if her heart was breaking. Maybe it was. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Thomas murmured into her hair, but his voice was thick with unshed tears. "It's going to be okay." I folded the completed forms and put them in my purse. Monday morning, I would drive them to the school myself and hand-deliver them to Mrs. Patterson. By spring semester, Sam and Mila would be safely enrolled at Riverside Academy, and Thomas and I could finally focus on rebuilding our marriage. It was the right decision. It had to be. But as I listened to Mila's quiet sobs and saw the defeat in Thomas's shoulders, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Something that might have been doubt if I'd allowed myself to examine it too closely. Instead, I went upstairs to run a bath, leaving Thomas to comfort his daughter and deal with the consequences of the choice I'd forced him to make. Tomorrow I would call Lucas and tell him about my victory. Tonight, I would focus on the peace that was finally within reach. The house felt different after we dropped Sam and Mila at Riverside Academy 3 weeks later. Quieter, certainly, but not in the peaceful way I'd anticipated. Instead of the comfortable silence of a home at rest, there was an emptiness that seemed to echo with accusation. Thomas had barely spoken during the 2-hour drive home from the school, and when he did break his silence, it was only to mention practical matters: stopping for gas, whether I wanted to grab dinner somewhere, what time he needed to leave for work Monday morning, the easy conversation I'd been hoping for. The reconnection without constant interruptions remained stubbornly elusive. This is what we needed, I told myself, as I rearranged the living room furniture to better suit 2 adults instead of a family of 4. This is how we fix things. But Thomas spent most evenings in his study, grading papers with obsessive thoroughness, or on the phone with Sam and Mila, his voice taking on a warmth that had become increasingly rare when he spoke to me. At work, things were different too. My daily lunches with Lucas had evolved into something more intimate, more necessary. He was the only person who seemed to understand what I'd sacrificed to try to save my marriage, the only one who supported my difficult decisions without judgment. "You did what you had to do," Lucas said over coffee on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the children left. "Thomas will come around once he realizes how much better things can be." "I hope so," I replied, though privately I was beginning to have doubts. He's been so distant since they left. I thought he'd be relieved to have some space, some time for us to reconnect. "He's probably feeling guilty. That's natural, but guilt fades, and then he'll be grateful for what you've given him." Lucas reached across the small cafe table to take my hand, his thumb tracing across my knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and necessary. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm lonely. I thought I wanted the quiet, but the house feels so empty now. And Thomas, it's like he's there physically, but not emotionally. Maybe he needs more time to adjust. Or maybe he resents me for making him choose." "Did you make him choose, or did you just force him to acknowledge a choice that needed to be made anyway?" It was exactly what I needed to hear, the validation that had become as essential as air. Lucas understood me in ways Thomas never had, saw my perspective without the complicating factors of grief and guilt and divided loyalties. "I should get back to the office," I said reluctantly, though what I really wanted was to spend the entire day in this small cafe, holding hands with someone who actually listened to me. "Dinner tonight?" Lucas asked. "There's a new Italian place downtown I've been wanting to try." I hesitated for just a moment, thinking of Thomas at home with his stack of papers to grade and his phone calls to the children. "I'd like that." That evening, I left Thomas a note on the kitchen counter explaining that I was having dinner with a colleague to discuss a work project. It wasn't technically a lie. Lucas was a colleague, and we did discuss work occasionally between more personal conversations. The Italian restaurant was intimate, dimly lit, the kind of place where couples celebrated anniversaries and special occasions. Lucas had requested a corner table, and we sat close together, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about everything except the complications waiting for me at home. "You look beautiful tonight," Lucas said as we finished our entrees, and I felt a flutter of excitement that had been missing from my life for months. "Thank you," I replied, suddenly aware of how long it had been since Thomas had complimented me on anything beyond my efficiency at handling household logistics. "Edra," Lucas said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I need to tell you something." My pulse quickened. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." Lucas told me he was falling in love with me, and I admitted I felt the same, even though I knew it was a line I couldn't uncross. When I got home near 11, Thomas was waiting. He asked about my work dinner, then calmly pressed for details. I lied, said it was for a client, and he let the silence do the work. Then he asked about Lucas. My stomach dropped. A coworker had mentioned our daily lunches, and Thomas had checked my story. The client I named had never heard of me or my company. When I tried to explain, he opened a folder and showed printed copies of my messages with Lucas, saved through the family computer backup. Seeing my words on paper made them look uglier, more deliberate. Thomas didn't yell. He just said he wanted me out of the house tonight and that we'd communicate through lawyers. As I packed, the truth hit me hard. I hadn't been the misunderstood wife. I'd been the person clearing a path for my own wants. And now the ending was final.